Thanks for joining us. I also want to thank our co-hosts, um, the originators of the 2010 Nebraska Farm and Food Economy Reports, No More Empty Pots, with their former executive director, Nancy Williams. Y'all can stand up if you'd like. Thank you for being here. Yeah. Cindy K. Renna with the Holly Hamlet. Thank you for your support and all this. They are also our co-hosts. And some of my colleagues from the Heartland Regional Food Business Center. Thank you all for being here, as well as Milkweed Kitchen and Open Harvest that provided our refreshments. And now to introduce our guests of honor. The author of both the 2010 and the 2024 Nebraska Farm and Food Economy Reports. And just a little teaser, he's also authored 10 additional area-specific farm and food economy reports for Nebraska that we'll be releasing in the coming weeks. Ken Meter is the founder of Crossroads Resource Center. He is one of the most experienced food system analysts in the United States, integrating market analysis, business development, systems thinking, and social concerns. Ken holds more than 50 years of experience in inner city and rural community capacity building. His local economic analysis have promoted local food networks in 145 regions in 42 states, 2 provinces, and 4 tribal nations. He is also the author of Building Community Food Webs, and he has a book signing this evening at Francie and Finch at 5:30 that everyone's welcome to. Without any further ado, our guest of honor, Mr. Meter.
It's really wonderful to see so many people in the hall. Thank you very much for coming out here. Actually, when I first got here, people were saying, "Well, we're not sure how many people are going to come," and this is a really big turnout. So thank you for showing up. I want to actually start with a story about. Well, first of all, I want to mention Lori Tetro is in the audience. She's mentioned in the book, and I really am impressed with how many people I knew from Nebraska before I got here, and how many of you have come. And actually, I've connected a couple of people in the room who didn't know each other, so that's always a fun thing. But I want to kind of start by telling a story that is more personal. My father grew up in Ottawa County. He was born in 1903. My family emigrated from many places, from France to Illinois to Missouri to Nebraska, arriving in Ottawa County in 1871. When my father was a young kid, he was a smart guy. And the town doctor had hired his father, my grandfather, to take care of his horses and to kind of drive him around the community when he was doing house calls. The doctor recognized my father was not getting challenged enough at school, so he hired my father to dust his book collection. He knew that would be enough to get Clarence reading those books. He also paid and arranged for my father to get to a bigger town up to about 20 miles away to go to school. So my father actually went to school, lived in a rooming house for 5 nights a week, went back home to the weekend, went to his rooming house. He graduated from UNL about 100 years ago with a Phi Beta Kappa. And he then moved on to a career in doing labor relations work. He worked for the National Labor Relations Board, and he was very upset when I got involved in agriculture at all because it was such a terrible way to make a living. And he worked so hard to make sure that his kids did not have to face that future, face that choice. And it's really kind of miraculous. With all that background, I'm here today. There's a deeper story I could go into sometime about all the connections that made my family possible here. But it's really been great for me to kind of see how this work resonates in a state that I know something about from, as I mentioned, the book coming down here when I was young, because my father wanted me to see what a real watermelon tasted like, and also to see my relatives. But it was really a very big education for me as a suburban kid in Minneapolis. But my education continues learning from folks like you. Thank you very much for having me here. This is actually a photograph from the cemetery that I visited yesterday, where my great-grandparents are buried and my grandparents are buried, and my father's infant brother who died at 6 years old. It's Paul Church outside of Paul, Nebraska. Basically a renegade group of Catholics who did not feel comfortable with the rest of society, who really clustered there to worship in the way they wanted to be rural people working the land and building community together instead of being sort of sucked into a system of privilege and kind of hierarchy. And it was a very difficult life for all of them because they were fighting against the mainstream at that point. But they taught me how to fight against the mainstream. And I think that's really great to see other people joining me in that. Just for those of you who have not seen me before, a quick map. This is a little bit out of date, but it shows the places I've been able to work in the last 20 years or so. And each of those brown areas is a statewide study I've done, including Nebraska. It's hard to show that I've done Nebraska twice, but there you are. And then the smaller studies are little regional studies, and we're now up to 100 with the new Nebraska studies, up to 155 studies of 42 states, 42 provinces and 4 tribes. And one of the things I really like about this work is it's been very viral. People, actually, I spoke in Council Bluffs once, and I heard about it from a person in Illinois who heard about it from a person in Washington State. And I think that's what gives me the understanding this is really robust work that will last a long time. You've already seen the cover of the book. I know you do all of that, but let me talk a little bit about what a food system should accomplish. Often in America, we have this kind of trauma of thinking that the only measure of success is how much wealth you have or how much money your farm makes. And that gets translated very often into, do we have a successful farmer or a celebrity chef? We celebrate individual wealth accumulators more than we celebrate community victories. I think it's really important to have a complicated notion of what we think success is. So we're not talking simply about money. Obviously, wealth is important, and if farmers don't build wealth, as my family did not, it's not going to be a sustainable food system. But it's also true that we need to build health in the community. Food is our first line of defense against getting ill. And if we don't do that right, we're going to have more and more health problems, and I'll talk about that later. We also need to connect around food. There's a reason we have food at parties like this, because we connect in a different way for eating together than if we simply sit in a room together. And food is so central to culture. On my mother's side, I have traditions that I celebrate at holiday time, where I basically say, this is the same food my great-grandmother cooked on her wood stove in Bohemia. And by cooking that food, I'm claiming my place in a culture and a heritage that I cannot really shake and I don't want to move away from. But also we need to have the capacity to handle food safely. And I would argue that for all the bells and whistles our food has right now, we're very dumb about food as a society. So we have beautiful packaging. We are very seduced by colorful images, by advertising. But if we had a meeting in Lincoln when my father was graduating 100 years ago, most everyone in the room would have known a farmer, would have known how to take a hog from animal to meat if need be. And now we have people who don't have pots or pans in their kitchen because they don't think that it has anything to do with eating. And I think it's a remarkable transition we've gone through as a society to really dumb down our society in favor of flashy food choices that get us into dead ends. So I think it's important to kind of have a complicated view of what we need to do. And when one of these gets frustrated by a political situation or by whatever, we also have other things we can go pull back on. And we have to think about how do these relate? How do they build synergies and not simply who's making money? So I think it's really important to hold to that vision for all of our work. I like this health, wealth, connection, capacity because I can say it quickly. It's a little bit too simplistic, but also if I get it more complicated, no one can hear it at all. So I think this is a good shorthand for us to work with. Next, I'd like to talk about why my book is called Building Community Food Webs. A lot of us a lot of people in the industry will use a diagram like this and talk about a supply chain. And the language is, well, we have to use that because everybody else uses that language. And that kind of vision often says there's a producer there and push the system. And it comes out the other end to a consumer, and we have a chain. I don't like the chain mentality because I think it reeks of slavery to me. But also it reeks of a power system where one person has the power and they yank the chain and someone else has to follow that, rather than a network of relationships where people get to influence themselves for themselves. This is a very convenient model if you are someone who's calculating the value added at each stage of the process. So I think it's got some value, but it's a limited value. I started drawing this diagram, this as a circle diagram, because I think it's a much more robust way to think about our food system. Basically, where the farmers are on top, and the food moves through all these hands, and if the organic waste from our food system gets recycled back into organic waste for new fertility for farmers. If we have a circular system, it's a stronger system, it's a more egalitarian system than if we have a chain. But also, this does not fully describe what's going on. We have to look at the center of the diagram. We need policymakers, we need researchers, we need clean air, we need healthy soil, we need clear water. If we don't have that, the food system will not be regenerative over time. And if the food system is not regenerative, the farms cannot be regenerative. So we have to think about it very differently than our mainstream society does. Even that, this is too simple. And I at the risk of making this look too weird, all these people also connected across the circle if we have a community-based food system where a farmer might invest in a processing plant so they can have meat that they can actually have a stake in deciding the policy of a meat plant. Or someone might buy a membership in a food cooperative like the cooperative you have in Lincoln that I visited yesterday, because they want to have a more active relationship to food than simply being a consumer. And those connections are really what makes this work well. It's why I'm really thrilled to see people in the room that I've known before, because when we connect together, we can do better things than alone. I think a better term for this is a community food web. And I think that a lot of our organizations get lost trying to say, our mission will be to get more people wealthy, or to get a food hub to be as profitable as possible, rather than saying our mission is to build a web of relationships that will make those things work, make those things flourish, because it will last over time. And I think, and I'm really having an interesting struggle right now with the decline of federal funding. A lot of people are falling back on, well, we just have to do what's to make this thing profitable. And that's the wrong answer. And I think we have to continue to make the case that building webs of relationships is the answer. That's the only way that our work is going to thrive over the long haul. So that's why I'm happy with the title of my book. I had to really wrestle with my editor to get that approved, actually. Okay, you know what Nebraska is, but Kylie Kai from Center for Rural Affairs had some wonderful maps to show the regions we did for the state, and also the tribal nations. The tribal reports are much simpler than the other ones because it's just a restatement of what the Census of Agriculture reports for each tribe. It's not a very in-depth report because the data is much more narrow. But the others are actually a little bit more challenging than the statewide report that I'm going to talk about today. And I just want to place my family geographically in 1871. We have some immigrant stories to tell from those days as well, but I won't tell them right now. These are the regions we defined, which I think are based on the Labor Department's regions in Nebraska. And we just, we realized that the conditions in each region would be very different based on the climate, the soil differences, the weather differences, and also the type of equipment and the type of farming that's being done. So we wanted to kind of particularize that in some regional stories. And I think we really found some profound regional differences that we'll be talking about in the next year. Okay, now some data from the report for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet. And this will resemble what I posted in 2010, but it's updated data. The Nebraska population has increased 34% in the last 53 years. That's a terrific sign because we hear a lot about rural kind of population decline, and we hear a lot about the troubles in the Midwest and the growth in the metro areas of the East and the West Coast. So I think it's a very strong sign that we have 34% of increase in population. Of course, that's mostly Omaha and Lincoln. It's not the rural areas. We have some rural communities that the regional cities we see population actually declining. But let's stay with Nebraska for now. Personal income has gone up 195%, which means income's gone up much faster than population base. That's a tremendous asset that the state has. And this is after adjusting for inflation. So for all the talk, we've had a lot of troubles with food price inflation the last few years. Despite inflation, despite the troubles we're having, we're in a much better shape now than we were 50 years ago. And we don't want to lose sight of that fact as we think about our food supply. This shows the breakdown of income sources for different sources for different sectors of the economy. And I think this is really interesting too, because the number one source of income in Nebraska is capital income. Income people earn from interest, dividends, and rent. The stocks they own, property they rent out to people, and so on. That's a sign that capitalism is working for a significant sector of the population. Obviously not for everybody, but it's the number one source of income. The number two source of income is transfer payments, things like retirement income, Social Security payments, SNAP dollars. So for those of you who think we should get rid of those public programs, be very careful, because they're a very important part of the state economy. And you see what a big difference the pandemic era transfer payments made to keeping income high at a time when we were really in desperate straits. So again, very critical to have that. Number three source of income is government jobs. And that includes municipal governments, it includes county and state and local governments. It also includes federal workers. It includes educators as well. So if you work as a teacher or a professor, then you're included as a government job. Number three source of income. Again, be very careful if you want to get government out of your lives, because you're going to have very strong ramifications. Number four source of income is, there are two very close. Manufacturing in the blue line and healthcare in the red line. Notice that we're getting more personal income in Nebraska from getting sick than we are from manufacturing. How long can we continue doing that? Retail and wholesale are kind of down here, and there's, I think, finance and insurance are a strong industry in Nebraska as well. But it's really instructive. The next slide shows if you take transfer payments and government jobs together, it's 28% of all the personal income earned by all of the people who live in Nebraska. 1/4 and more of what we earn today depends on public programs. Be very careful about eliminating those. One of my quests has been to try to develop a language for talking about this that does not polarize us, that does not partizanize this, but basically says, how do we work together to kind of think about things in a more neutral way and to find out a good solution in the future? So one question these charts raise is earning $120 billion of personal income a year enough to make Nebraska able to feed itself? What do you think? No. Well, I mean, it's certainly not happening, but 120 billion would go a long way to feeding the population. And I think mostly I want to make the argument that the state has the resources to do quite a bit more than it does along these lines. And I also will as you'll learn about in my book, because of the extractive nature of the food system we have and the food economy we're part of, it's very difficult to do that without federal money helping us leverage those local investments. But still, $120 billion is a lot of money to spend with. If we thought about this as something we invest together in a food system, or part of that money going as an investment we make in a food system, how would we think about our food differently, and how would we think about our investments differently? Beautiful map from the city of Lincoln of a gardening spot here. Nebraska residents purchase $7.1 billion worth of food a year, and including about $4.5 billion to eat at home. And this shows you how it breaks down into little categories. Curiously enough, the largest category is other, including sweets and fats and oils. Those are big markets that most farmers would think were significant to go after if the infrastructure was there to make that a viable economic choice, but they're very difficult to tap. At the same time, if you're earning $120 billion a year and you're only spending $7 billion a year on buying food, that gives you a sense of the economic power the state would have to think about things in a very different way. Let's look at the food that farmers sell directly to household consumers or directly to intermediaries that are more community-based. They're very small numbers compared to that $7 billion figure. 1,100 farms, only 2.5% of the farms in the state sell about $16.6 million of product directly to households. And this includes internet sales. So if I'm a farm in Nebraska, someone from New York orders a side of beef from me, that's going to be included as a local sale. So this doesn't all even stay in Nebraska, but mostly it does. And it does build connections between those farmers and the consumer if it's done right. Direct to intermediaries like food hubs or an aggregator of some kind, only 311 farms, that's 0.7% of the farms in the state, sold $12.5 million of products in 2022. And I'm in the italics, you'll see the figures for 2017 if you see how those have changed, but it's very hard to make good comparisons because the data is not reported all that accurately. Value-added products where we take, say, tomatoes and make a salsa or something that can be shelf stable. Again, for only 400 farms selling value-added products, but it was $15 million for the product. That's a good amount. And in both number of farms and amount of value, an increase over 5 years before. So there's some hopeful signs here, but these are like less than 1% of the food trade in Nebraska. And given that Nebraska is the fourth largest farm state in the country, and as you see later, has fairly profitable farms compared to the rest of the country, it's a really kind of remarkable gap in our thinking. I think the 2010 study I did for No More Empty Pots probably highlighted the fact that something like 90%, and that may be a conservative estimate, of the food Nebraskans eat is imported. And I don't think we have good numbers like this, partly because to measure that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It wouldn't be a very accurate number. But also, I'm guessing that 90% is a cautious estimate, so we don't have to argue about the numbers, but we can say, well, let's start with a conservative guess and think about how we change that. But if we take $7 billion of purchases, and if 90% of those come from outside of South Farm State, that's more than $6 billion leaving Alaska every year. And how long does Nebraska want that to continue? Well, here's one step we could make. What if every Nebraska resident had purchased for them or purchased for themselves $5 worth of food every week from some farm in the state of Nebraska? That would be $512 million of income for those farmers. Now that's only 6%, I'm sorry, 2% of current cash receipts. So it's a very small number in some ways, but it's a huge increase over the numbers I just showed you. And that would be only $5 every week for every person in the state. Some folks in Colorado heard me talk about this in Southwest Colorado a number of years ago, and they spent $300 on a poster saying, eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day, buy $5 of food a week from a farmer. They put up posters around the town, and that went to 3 counties virally in about 3 weeks, 3 months, I should say. But very simple steps like that of having a campaign for let's buy from local farmers can help encourage people to make those connections between farmers and consumers. So the commodity farmers in Nebraska produce $29 billion worth of commodities. They had a pretty good year in 2022, so they only spent about $23 billion to produce them. The margin farmers made was almost enough to feed the entire population of Nebraska, but that's not how it got spent. At the same time, this is also a more positive story than I've ever collected anywhere in the country in all the studies I've done. And I don't know all the reasons for that because the causes for this are a little bit obscure to me. But what really stands out is if you look at what the state is producing, these are the top 4 crops: cattle and calves, corn, soybeans, and hogs. Most of these, I would argue, are raw materials for industrial processing, not food items for people. And so this beautiful landscape of land we have, of ample rain in many parts of the state, of really sophisticated farmers with sophisticated equipment, It's basically serving an industrial market and not very reliably, as we'll see pretty soon. But here's a graph to show those numbers visually. And you can see the preponderance of production is basically to support an industrial way of thinking rather than supporting people eating in a healthy way and connecting with farmers and having community around food. And it is, as I mentioned, the fourth largest farm state in the US. And 25 million chickens and 15 million cattle and hogs live in this state. Only 2 million people. For some reason, those 35 million animals are treated much better than our people because they can pretty much count on food raised in Nebraska to feed them. And they can pretty much count on that being reliably there year after year, month after month. And we've never done the planning to make sure the human population of Nebraska has the same luxury. And that's a remarkable thing, I think. So now I become famous for these charts showing the 50-year trends of agricultural production. The first thing I want to say is the government stopped reporting this data in September 2023 under the Biden administration. The decision was made, this was too expensive to compile, and they are no longer reporting it. So I can tell you what happened between 1969 and 2022. After that, you're on your own. If we can't have data like this, we can't have a thoughtful conversation about where we go. So that's a huge dilemma that we're facing, and it's only getting worse with the current administration. This chart that shows, the orange line shows what farmers in Nebraska earned selling their products over the last 50 years. And you see tremendous growth. You can see the results of the new mechanization, the new chemical applications, the new technical expertise, new varieties that farmers can take advantage of. And that's a terrific growth. Unfortunately, if you look at the maroon line, you find out that production costs went up every time farmers made a little bit more money because input dealers can charge more money if farmers are making money. And also farmers are spending more to do what they do today than they did in 1969. So the red line subtracts those expenses from the cash receipts using what I call the net cash. It's the net cash farm income. It's a measure of whether farm production is actually paying its own way. This does not include government payments. It does not include farm-related income like renting out land to a neighbor. It doesn't include other source of income you might have by being an agritourism site or what have you. It's just saying does the actual process of production pay its own way? And what you see is that despite this massive growth in production and sales, the income is held pretty steady over the last 54 years. And we've had a few good years in here. Why did prices go up in 2008, 2009? Combination of two things. One was that ethanol became more popular. More buyers were buying ethanol corn to make ethanol. But the story that's often not told is that the grain prices were bid up by commodity traders during the global housing crisis because they bailed their investments out of housing because they considered it unstable. And they looked for something they could make money on. They thought they could make money on commodities. So the price of grains was bid up artificially, and that became a bubble that lasted only a couple of years. And then we went down to negative income in 2017 after that bubble. I remember this moment viscerally because I was in a coffee shop in Minneapolis talking with a friend from Oxfam. We were just getting introduced. We were having coffee to kind of get acquainted. And we were talking about commodity prices on the food trade. There was this guy at a table 10 feet away who was tapping on his computer. And after about 20 minutes, he came over to us and said, "Do you know what's happening with the commodity market? I heard you talking about the commodity market." He was a commodity trader. He had no idea what he was doing, what was going on. And he was coming to nonprofit people to ask him for explanations. First and last time that's happened in my life. But that bubble we had in 2008 didn't last. And we're going to see some more bubbles that burst pretty soon, because this is only one way of looking at these data. It turns out inflation has taken a toll on these numbers. So I like to take the same data, adjust that for inflation. Here's what the patterns look like when we do that. Peak years were actually 1973 during the OPEC energy crisis, 1979 when we were embargoing grain from the Soviet Union. Actually hit a real trough, obviously in the farm crisis days when I was a reporter covering the farm crisis. And then it's come back up in more recent years. But if you look at the net cash income and all that, it's pretty much the same now as it was 54 years ago. So despite doubling productivity, despite all the new bells and whistles our agriculture has, despite all the new technology and expertise we have, the return for farmers is not that good. And this is in a system that's very heavily subsidized, in a system where the infrastructure works totally in the favor of that system. And we wonder why it's difficult to do the local food. Because the system that we have inherited is really not working very well for farmers at all. Ben and I have been talking about this slide a little bit, and I don't have all the answers yet, but this breaks down the orange line into the income from livestock, income from crops. So you see basically that the income from livestock has pretty much stayed steady, a lot of ups and downs, but it's not getting much stronger. And what's really improved is income from selling crops. And again, this bubble starts when the ethanol boom kicks in and investors are speculating in grain. We see some of those cycles play out. So curiously, this data goes back to 1910 now. More people, more income, farm income steady, and the number of farms is declining. So one of the reasons farm income is declining because we don't have the proper infrastructure to support commodity farmers. Well, one reason is we're not valuing farmers as part of our communities anymore. We're thinking of them as people who can be replaced by Mexicans or by Canadians or by someone in Asia. We're thinking about basically farmland is expendable for development. And so all those pressures are putting the number of farms down at a point where we're eating more and more food. It doesn't really add up. Land in farms is being chewed up by development, and this is happening, of course, all over the country. And my book has some very good stories about people who've wrestled with that issue in very different parts of the country. But not only the number of farms declining, but the land base declining. We know we need vegetables for health. Here's the acreage of vegetables. We've been learning for the last 20 years about the importance of fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables in our diet. And the acreage of vegetables is going down. As Ben found out, most of this is potatoes. Most of this potatoes for French fries, I think. So our consumer habits are not responding to the economic trends that I can track with these data. The acreage of orchards in Nebraska gone up slightly, but even there, it peaked in 2007 and is now going down, even when we are knowing that we need more fruit in our bodies. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the media lately about SNAP dollars and how those lazy people are collecting SNAP coupons. And I thought it was important to kind of look at the data because I used to be able to get this data. It's no longer available from the federal government. But I think it's important to kind of look at these trends. You do see, I mean, in 1969, when these charts were started, almost nobody felt the courage to go get SNAP coupons, or they were not available, or there was not the staffing to make them available to people. So there was a very tiny part of the food economy in Nebraska in 1969. And, if hunger is going up, why is the number of farms declining? If hunger is going up, if income is going up, why are we not connecting that income with Nebraska farmers? And again, this comes from a preoccupation with the profitability of individual operations rather than looking at how is the system working for all of us. Mm-hmm. But then I also wanted to compare these numbers with the money we give farmers to grow raw materials for industrial processing. That's what you see in this chart. This is the same line you saw before. But when you compare it to farm subsidies, it's a very small amount of money. You can find out the averages in my report, but we have, I don't think we're having a conversation about whether Nebraska farmers are dependent on subsidies. Are we? But we have a conversation about people who get a lot less money, who have a lot less choice in their lives about whether they are dependent on SNAP dollars. And of course, at a time when billionaires are dependent on federal contracts. Well, I'm going to close off early now, but a couple of troubling trends I can track with the data. The number of Nebraska farms raising cattle and calves has diminished dramatically since 1997 from 25,000 to something like 15,000. The number of cattle and calves sold has held pretty much steady. So increasing concentration of cattle raising, not just processing. Number of Nebraska farms raising hogs and pigs has plummeted. The number of hogs and pigs sold has gone up. Again, increasing concentration in both those industries. This is not any surprise to any of you in the room, but it's precious to have data that shows the extent of that is happening. Here are the adjusted sales of the different livestock products that Nebraska farmers sell. Again, cattle and calves, not much better off than we were before, but we've had a few good years the last 2 years. You see the hogs and pigs declining there. Other types of animals diminishing to close to zero. When my great-grandfather was farming in Otoe County, Nebraska, every farm had diversified livestock because that was how you survived. And that was how you kept your soil healthy. And that was how you also fed your family. We have moved from that to a system which is extracting wealth from Nebraska. More about that in my book if you want to, but and also taking animals that used to be valued parts of a family farm and putting them into a much more remote place. So my final slide is Lorton, Nebraska, where my father was born. This is a picture from, I believe, 1942 or so. I don't have it actually. I don't know the photographer. I don't know the date, but it's an aerial shot of a town of the population of 75 at the time. I think this is during World War II when people were doing victory gardens. Look at how much of the land in this image is gardened. People putting up their own food because they had to. In 1942, 42% of all the produce eaten by all the American consumers was raised in backyard gardens, victory gardens. That happened after 2 years of war. It was a very responsive system that worked with small steps moving forward by individual people doing small things, which had a huge impact. And compare that 2-year process with the 50 years of extractive economies we have with the commodity system we've inherited. I also have to point out, this is where my father was born. This is the site of my great-grandfather's livery stable. And this is the house of this is the house of Dr. Smith, who invited my father to come and read his library.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you to everyone. I know we went over time a little bit. This is an awesome, robust conversation. If you have more questions for Ken, I would encourage you to reach out to him. He has been wonderful to get to know and work with over the last 1.5 years, and he's really happy to have these conversations. So thank you all for coming out. Please feel free to grab some treats on your way out, and you're welcome to mingle and network for a little while. We're not in a rush to get out of the room. So thank you all. Have a great day.